to fix bicycles, build forts, and I even got to teach my children how to fish. One year when my son was 11, we went on a mother and son camping trip. It was very spur of the moment. We'd just been to a garage sale and had scored a really great deal on a tent. And since it was Saturday, we decided to head for the mountains and try it out. I had not yet acquired much camping experience, and I had certainly never put up a tent before. So I guess it's not too surprising that it took us nearly 3 hours to get that tent up. But we finally did get it up, and we were rewarded with a very strong sense of accomplishment. We were campers. We knew what we were doing. Nothing was going to stop us now. And then it came time to build a fire. It didn't take long to recognize the value of having matches and some sort of a fire starter, mostly because we didn't have any. But thanks to some friendly campers, we conquered that challenge too. And then finally, we were free to turn our attention towards dinner. At last, I thought, something I already know how to do. This should be a piece of cake. Except for one thing. I was used to having utensils to cook with and eat with, but we'd forgotten those too. Not even one single fork. And how do you eat steak without utensils? Well, with your hands, of course. My son, still to this day, believes this to have been the coolest camping trip he's ever been on. And I have to agree, because at the end of the evening, as we sat in front of the fire with full bellies, we were able to laugh and relive all that we had just accomplished. There was between us a shared sense of pride. Then we looked up at the sky, and laid out before us was the most brilliant Milky Way that either of us had ever seen. And in that instant, everything shifted, and all that we had accomplished that day seemed tiny in comparison. Yet the importance of it all was not diminished, because everything that we had done had led us to that precise moment in that precise place. And as we sat there together looking at the sky, we experienced God. It was one of those rare instances in the human experience where we're taken by surprise and the curtain is pulled back just a little, and we're given a tiny peek at what is really real, and understanding that there is a purpose that is far greater than anything that we could ever imagine. And these, I believe, are the most sacred of sacred moments that shape and define and give substance to our faith. You've all seen the Milky Way, haven't you? I mean, I'm fascinated by the Milky Way. Within that cloud-like stretch of stars, it's impossible to make out all of the individual stars, and I just want to fall into it. Joseph Gordon-Levitt once said, "The spiral in a snail shell is the same mathematically as the spiral in the Milky Way galaxy, and it's also the same mathematically as the spirals in our DNA. It's the same ratio that you'll find in very basic music that transcends cultures all over the world. For most of us, seeing the Milky Way is a rare treat. We're so polluted by lights that we have to go somewhere like a mountaintop or a desert in order to see it. So we're probably more apt to be awestruck than someone like Abraham, who would have seen it every single night. For Abraham, looking at the Milky Way would have been as commonplace as looking out at our front lawn is to us. But when God escorted him outside to look up at the sky, I can only imagine that he felt the same awe that my son and I felt. Seeing it with God was probably like seeing it for the very first time. I like to imagine Abraham standing there with his head tilted back and his jaw hanging open, not just seeing it, but experiencing it. can see the light reflecting in his eyes and a tiny tear starting to form in the corner of one eye as God promises him many descendants, as many as there were stars above him. Abraham was impossibly old. His wife was impossibly old and barren. But here was God the Creator standing right there next to him, pulling back the curtain and promising the impossible. What else could he do but have faith? The story of Abraham's faith is fascinating because it is the wellspring of our faith. When Abraham looked up at the stars, our stars were among those that twinkled in his eyes. We may or may not be biological descendants of Abraham, but we are among the descendants of his faith. And like Abraham, we too struggle with our faith. Thankfully, Abraham chose to believe God in that moment, and God was impressed. God reckoned Abraham to be righteous. And from there, an amazing bond was formed between God and humans, leading all the way up to this moment. But this was not the first time that Abraham had stepped out in faith. Remember, he had already packed up his entire household and headed off into the great unknown because God had told him to do so. He didn't know where he was going or why. He just knew that God had told him to pack up his family and go. So he went. I can only imagine how he must have struggled with the decision. Well, do we follow God into the unknown, or do we stay here on this land that we have always known? Do we step out in faith, or do we stay here where we've always been happy and comfortable and secure? Is it worth the risk? Is God worth the risk? Faith is risk. Faith means following God into the unknown without any guarantees of the outcome. In our Hebrews reading for today, faith is defined as the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And that tells us that faith is assurance and that faith is conviction, but because faith believes in things not seen, faith is not certainty. It's risk. And sometimes things just don't work out. Sometimes the faithful must face disappointment. So why do we persist in faith even when we're disappointed? In the letter to the Hebrews, we are reminded that the faith of those who have gone before us is a trustworthy faith. And the God of those who have gone before us is a trustworthy God. So we persist in faith, even when we're disappointed. We persist in faith even when our marriages break. We persist in faith when we lose someone to death. We persist in faith when we face challenges and situations that keep us up at night, worrying. And as a community of faith, we persist in faith even when the future of our community is uncertain. We persist in faith not to delude ourselves from the realities of life, but to face them head on with hope and conviction and assurance that a better day, a new day is on the horizon, one that can be seen from the distance and can be greeted by all of God's children. Sometimes faith does not come easily. It's like the little boy who moved with his family to a new community and a new church. The Sunday school class required each student to quote a memory verse to the entire congregation. The little boy was terrified at the prospect, so they gave him a really short little verse from Matthew 14:27 that said, "It is I, don't be afraid." Well, the little boy practiced his verse all week. He said it at the breakfast table, he said it at supper time, he said it before he went to bed. Finally, he was able to say it without hesitation. As the class trooped into the sanctuary to say their verses, the little boy closed his eyes and he kept repeating his verse. It is I, don't be afraid. It is I, don't be afraid. It is I, don't be afraid. Suddenly, it was the little boy's turn. He opened his eyes and he saw 200 adults staring at him, and he panicked. With nowhere to hide and nowhere to run, he finally blurted out, "It's me, and I'm scared to death." Sometimes, even the most faithful find themselves saying, "It's me, and I'm scared to death." But that's okay, because doubt is necessary for us to exercise our faith. Doubt and faith must exist together, because if there isn't any doubt, then we're not really responding with faith, are we? Think about it. When we don't know something for sure, faith is what keeps us going. When we doubt, faith is what helps us believe through doubt. So if we didn't doubt, there wouldn't be any need to exercise our faith. Faithful people are not the ones who have all the answers. They're the ones who keep their hearts and minds open while they keep asking the questions and listening for God's voice and looking for God's Spirit. And finally, faith is not something that we just decide to have. It's a gift of grace that comes when we choose to get to know God and allow God to get to know us. Faith deepens when we take risks and make leaps that challenge God to answer our prayers. Faith grows legs when, through arguing and asking, seeking and receiving, we build a relationship of trust with God. Thomas Merton once wrote a prayer that could very easily accompany the reading from Hebrews. The prayer is as follows. My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself, and the fact that I think that I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does, in fact, please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. May it be with you all according to God's word. Amen. And now